Okay. So we're gonna talk about this Illuminati theory stuff, right? We all hear about it. We all know people that talk about it that actually believe it. So why don't you throw out some of the things that you've heard? Like, what is this Illuminati thing? Like, what do people talk about? Do you have anything you could think of?
I mean, people always talk about, these like shadowy, mysterious figures who like run the banks and everything, and they're trying to set like this new world order of, just like basically commodity slaves, like chips on their neck or some shit.
The mark of the beast.
Yeah, mark of the beast. They just mix up with all these other like reactionary tendencies, like the anti-Semitism, all the other shit. So like, in some ways, some of the stuff they're saying could like really be like understood, because the way how neoliberal capitalism is, it is a global system, and it does, and there is like a massive amount of wealth concentrated at the top. So it's like they're right about that, how these people who do run things, but not necessarily in the way that they think.
Yeah.
Like they don't see it as like a clear systemic issue, which is capitalism. So
that's I think a really important point to make, and that's something that we also touch on. Is that like when we're talking to people about this, you can't go in and just be like you're totally wrong about everything, right? Because realistically, there is some truth to what they're saying, right? There is a group of people that are controlling things to some degree, right, who benefit from the system in place, but they're not seeing it as systemic. So how do we get to that point where people can begin to see things as systemic and as a result of capitalism, and not just like a secret society of people in robes and, who do some sort of demonic something? Like there's like all these aspects to it. There's like, just some of the things that we've heard. Jay Z and Beyonce are in the, the Illuminati, and so but that speaks to this idea that if you are successful somehow, it's not because you did something; it's because there's something other outside of all of us that's working to get you that, right? The same thing with like 9/11 conspiracy theory. Like every time there's an event that happens, it's like there's some sort of conspiracy around like who did it, how it happened, it was planned.
Or some kind of natural disaster or some significant global event.
Exactly.
And then we'll generally hear like, if we're out like flying and talking to people, sometimes it'll be like the latest thing that happens gets incorporated into some pre-existing.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's sort of new stuff is always getting globbed on.
Yeah.
So like the other day, I looked online after Mike Brown's autopsy stuff came out, and he's shot mostly in his arm and in his head. Did you see this one?
No, I don't think
so. The thing I saw going around on blogs and a little bit on Facebook was like, oh, did you notice that Mike Brown was not shot in any of his vital organs? Because the conspiracy theory goes he was shot in such a way that in some versions it's like white people, in some it's like the white Illuminati, some sort of secret rulers can harvest the organs of young black people basically and make money selling them. Wow. So he's shot and killed by his lungs and heart and everything like that.
And actually, speaking of the stuff in Ferguson, actually somebody posted a YouTube video, and it was titled "Proof That Ferguson Was Planned." So they're basically saying that like this rebellion is not a rebellion of the people, but it was instead planned by some outside forces so that they could go in and bring the military and do what they're doing. And it was the same thing when Katrina happened. I remember hearing a lot about people were like, oh no, there's this machine, the Tesla, this guy. Yeah, there's a machine that will control the weather, and they created this storm. And they did it so that they could, blow up the levees to flood the Ninth Ward, to kick poor people out, to kick the people out from that area. And the thing is, like, as fantastical as it sounds, they're not wrong that, yes, they do want poor people out. They do want to develop this. They do want to make money off of this, right? So that's, again, there's like the aspect of that is correct, but it's like the whole like reasoning and why it happens and how it happens is what is incorrect, So,
are you talking about HARP?
Yeah, HARP. Yeah, there's a guy named Tesla supposedly created some machine that can, like, I don't know, I don't really understand the science of it, but somehow it manipulates the weather patterns.
With like some crystals in the air or some shit.
Basically, something like that.
Well, no, I mean, the argument usually is that HAARP exists. Like, if you try to challenge their theory, they were like, well, it exists. And like, well, yeah, it does exist, but that doesn't mean it's responsible for, you know,
this is what
every earthquake and every flood or tsunami that is happening.
There's often those jumps in reasoning that happen. You know,
So just now that we've named, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say so we had been encountering a lot of these kinds of theories when we were out, like just flying and talking to people. So we wrote this pamphlet, How to Overthrow the Illuminati, which is really actually like a clever debunking of the Illuminati and then being like, here's how you overthrow capitalism. But then we did a bunch of reading too about like where did those conspiracy theories come from. So like we understand there's lots of different I'm sure there's regional and national variations in different kinds of conspiracy theory, but we are mostly interested in like the type of Illuminati conspiracy theory that sort of exists in like the hood in the United States, basically, largely but not entirely like a Black American phenomenon, but also just like a hood phenomenon, you know, multiracial hood phenomenon, and often tends to be more like more men tend to talk about it than women. But that's not to say there's like a variety in my experience, for whatever reason, we figure that out too. But that's not to say that there's not a sort of a blurring and an exchange between very similar kinds of conspiracy theory in the U.S. with like downwardly mobile and like lumpen white folks, you know. So there actually is a lot of weird resonance between a kind of millenarian end of times Illuminati conspiracy theory among like poor Black and brown people, and that among like white folks in the trailer park in Michigan. Actually, there was a militia that thought like the Antichrist was coming a couple of years ago, and they were like training, and they went to attack some police stations because they thought they were like the state was being taken over by the Antichrist or something like that. So there is weird blurrings, but we were mostly interested in the hood stuff, and you can see that circulating basically in any book tables out in neighborhoods. There's usually some selection of maybe some Pan-Africanist literature, something about Masons, you know, just like odd mix of hey man.
Why did you guys decide to focus on the hood?
Because that's where we were doing organizing stuff, you know. And so you would always find, if you were flyering or talking to people and about like police violence or tenant stuff or something, and we'd be like, and you know it's connected to the system and the immediate response would be, you're absolutely right. Did you know about this thing that they caused the Katrina to happen? And the thing, we'd be like, whoa, what do you mean? And it'd be a very challenging conversation off the bat, you know. So we're like, wow, a lot of people think this. Now, oddly, it's like block to block. So when we were out here flyering to say, come to this event, that we, like 3 blocks down, there's sort of like, what's that coffee shop down the way, like that way, the kind of hip one. There's like a nice little coffee shop down the way, like 4 blocks. So we fly some people outside that, and it's sort of like a joke. We're like, this is about, you know, the Illuminati stuff that people talk about. And people, they were like, ha ha ha, how funny. That's silly, you know. And so it was sort of like a joke there. And then 3 blocks further over in the projects we're flying, we're like, this is a thing about Illuminati theory and how we don't think it's right. And the dude's response immediately was, but there is an Illuminati, you know?
And his reasoning
block
was,
to block.
But the thing is, his reasoning was, there's just too many rich white people.
How else do you explain it?
How else do you explain it, you know? And I think it's important. Some people would hear that and be like, oh, that's like silly, you know, that shows like a lack of consciousness. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. The fact that he is saying there's all these rich white people, there's all these people with power, and we don't have it, you know, it's not something we did. It's clearly something outside of us, and I think that speaks a lot to where people's minds are at, because they are recognizing, because what is like the normal thing that you hear people say? It's like this, you know, well, you know, you blame the poor. They're not. It's not the blame the poor ideology where it's like, well, you did something wrong, we did something wrong, so that's why we're not those rich people. Is that no, something is going on here, something outside of us, something that we can't control. But what is it, right? It's just the what is it part that's like what we disagree with, obviously, which we believe is wrong, right? But so I think it's important to understand that when you come across someone like that, and I think oftentimes in poor communities of color, when you got people talking about Illuminati, it actually speaks to a higher level of political consciousness. than a lower level. Yeah, I think that's important to keep in mind.
Like it tends to be sort of like if you have a crew of friends or whatever that are hanging out, there's often usually the like one or two dudes who are like the guys who are reading lots of stuff on the internet and trying to connect world events and whatnot, and they're sort of like the local intellectuals of their crew, and they're just using this as their medium to analyze the world. Now the tools they're using to analyze it from our perspective have serious shortcomings, that actually prevent some of the analysis and action that we would want to see, but it indicates an attempt to sort of get at the world around you.
So how do you address it when you come across these situations?
Yeah, it's difficult, and depending on what the theory is that they're coming with, it's sometimes hard to combat it. But the reason that we wrote this is because we wanted to go historically into like where did this come from? Because we thought that was like the best way to debunk it, is to show people, well, hold on, wait a minute, because what you're talking about actually has roots here, here, and here. So I don't know if you want to get a little bit into like how to do that, like the historical aspect of it.
Yeah. What we had basically was talk a little bit about the history of where Illuminati conspiracy theory, how it became prevalent a little bit, and then also had some notes on, okay, if that's the case, how do we then talk to folks, basically. But does that sound good? We can go through that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do your thing.
Cool.
Do you have any questions? Anybody have any questions until the point, or good?
No, I mean, I would just make the comment too, like, that whole Illuminati thing, it's, in some ways, it helps compensate for that alienating feeling that we experience under capitalism. And so when people figure out these things, instead of viewing life as meaningless, it has like this larger purpose. And so when they discover it, they feel like, oh wow, I'm special because I know this and other people don't, so I'm enlightened. And so it kind of blurs the the facts. It doesn't allow people to concretely look at these things and make objective like observations from them. It's all clouded in this like mystique, and they could be whatever they want. They can just think it, and then it'll make sense because this or that. Obama did this, or he's part of this, or whatever. So it's like people have to understand, and when too, it's like it's very popular. So when other people know about it, they're like, "Oh wow, you know about it too? That's cool." And it compensates for that alienating effect that you feel under capitalism. And so it's like when communicating with people, you have to explicitly find the ways in which you don't necessarily reject them, because you can't totally reject a person, because when they're telling you this, they're like, they think this is something profound they're telling you, and like if you don't accept it, they're gonna be like, well, you're like denying me like this mutual feeling of recognition or enlightenment or whatever. So it's like when you have to disseminate like debunk from like the actual analysis and the concrete understanding of like things. So like I remember like my uncle, he was telling me like, yo, I know you're smart, man, like do you believe in Illuminati? I'm like, not really, but I do believe there's like a select group of people in power who have most of the money. And he's like, yeah, I can dig that, man. And it's like he understands. So you get to, and then from there you can have like larger conversations about, well, this instead of that, this may be why, because they control the means of production or whatever. Right. And so then you can start talking about that. So it's like important not to like alienate somebody that you're talking to, like be totally antagonistic or like authoritarian about how you break down their ideas.
Can I say one thing? I just want to say, when I was 16, I used to believe this. I remember sitting with my friend and having conversations for hours and hours about everything that we had heard. 9/11 happened, and we were all about the $20 bill, folding it up and showing everybody, and so we were into this, But so I say that to say that now I realize that is incorrect. So it is possible to also get past, but we need to. I think the task really of the left and the responsibility is to figure out how to engage with people in a way where we can come to like a new synthesis with people about what is going on. But it's possible.
What made you change your mind?
Yeah, I think it was it was I believed in the Illuminati stuff when I was younger, and I still also had somewhat of an understanding of capitalism, right? Not really developed. But I think just like the more you talk with people, the more you get into doing political, for me, it was getting into doing more political work, organizing, talking with people. I remember just a few years ago, we had a bunch of our friends together, and they all do political work, and I remember saying something, we were talking about 9/11, and I remember being like, well, yeah, y'all know that was planned, right? And everybody was like, huh? This was only a few years ago. But in my head, it still made sense to me that, well, they planned it, like, that wasn't real, like, that's not what, and they were like, no, like, that's not true. And in the moment, I was kind of like, well, I got upset, right? Because I was like, some people laughed, and I was like, oh, they're laughing, like, they think, like, they're smarter than me or something. But then, as I continue to talk with people and to read more and to form, I think, a deeper understanding of the way capitalism works, I began to realize this doesn't make any sense. It cannot be this, like things happened as a result of this system. So, and actually understanding, having more of a materialist analysis, right? So like looking at material conditions and understanding that these are the things that impact what happens, I think helped. So yeah, I was still, even a couple, like 3-4 years ago, I was still about the $20 bill.
No, yeah, that's how I started too. Like, somebody shared this video of Zeitgeist, which you probably know.
Zeitgeist, yeah.
Zeitgeist. Everybody fucking knows that. And like, my mind was blowing. Like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But like, I want to learn more because I'm an introspective guy, and like, I'm always thinking about shit. So like, I want to learn more. So I was, I look around the internet, and then like, I find this video of like Howard Zinn. And like, I read his book, and I'm like, whoa, this makes a lot more sense, because this is actual history. And so from there, like, you start looking at all these other things, and then I started reading all these other people like Chomsky and then all these other folks. And so then, you start to understand concretely what is, the nature of the system and how it works. But you also learn that there's a possible way to overthrow it. There's an alternative. In this theory, there is no alternative. They just control everything. You can't do anything. But like, when you understand the material conditions of capitalism and how it affects society, then you can start to say like, okay, how can I change this? And then you look at history, and then you look at all the examples.
So I don't know if you're going to address this,
Sure.
but I want to throw it out there. When I look at conspiracy online, it seems like there's a lot of money behind. Like, it comes from somewhere. So who benefits from throwing out these conspiracy theories? Where do they come from?
That is an interesting question. I have not thought about that. I really wonder too. I can't say I have an answer off the top of my head. I've never thought about who benefits or who was putting this out there. I don't know.
I think in my experience, at least, it's depending on where the conspiracy theory is and how it's taken up, it would be sort of produced in different ways, So I'm like, the conspiracy theory that circulates in the hood, I don't know if there's major institutional players behind it, because you're talking like small micro press books and like burned DVDs that people are selling each other, and YouTube videos, and but that the same set of ideas that are in those DVDs could be used in a different way. That's like, someone else can say, oh, I have my own reason for believing that there's a secret international Jewish banking conspiracy because I have these anti-Semitic politics, and that's going to further mine. So it's sort of like a set of arguments or historical claims or whatever that get circulated in different ways, but can be useful from a variety of different positions. And weirdly are used both from sort of, and historically, as we'll talk about in a second, have been used both from sort of like a ruling class elite perspective to explain why rebellion and instability happens, and from a sort of oppressed perspective to explain why oppression sort of happens. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but it's basically, it's used differently.
Just wanted to hear your vision on it.
Yeah.
The one thing that I did notice, and I think also part of how I got into talking more about conspiracy theory when I was younger and believing it, was because I was really into like nationalist stuff when I like black nationalism, the NOI, like because they seemed in the moment, when you're young and you see that and you don't have like really fully developed politics, that shows you.
No, it's I'm sorry. I'm an artist. I used to be a journalist. And I'll be back. Oh, you recording?
Yeah.
Cool. Be back. Hold up.
What was I saying? So I kind of came to it through like black nationalism. I was never down with the NOI, but I knew people who were part of the NOI, and I would talk with them a lot. And it's kind of like there's an overlap, I think, within black nationalism and conspiracy. And actually, a lot of black nationalists, like the NOI, their theory is based on like the most ridiculous conspiracy you'll ever hear in your life, you know. But like a lot of them have their bases in these things too. So in the moment, it feels like, oh yeah, this is great. They're radical. They're talking about issues that other people are not talking about. This is the way to fight back. But when you get into the heart of it, it's actually totally just based on conspiracy. It's unfortunate, but
So I wanted to do a brief, if we can move on briefly, I wanted to do a brief rundown of historically where the sort of core spine of most of the conspiracy theories that we tend to hear come from. And when I'm talking about that core sort of narrative, it's the basic. It's like, what did I write down? That there's sort of a secret society that controls much of the world through governments, banks, and maybe like microchips technology, that secret society is referred to as the Illuminati, and then sometimes is linked either through sort of a historical lineage or maybe a set of religious ideas with maybe way back to ancient secret societies. Maybe they're linked to a certain, like Satan worship or something like that. They'll often be equated with Jews, basically, and that connects with the banking conspiracy. But that's the basic core trunk, off of which all the different branches get globbed on, whatever the latest current event is, or, some other micro conspiracy theory about KFC being run by the Klan that gets plugged in, but that tends to be the main narrative that you hear. So where did that main narrative come from, basically? When we were reading, we got basically that core of the conspiracy theory tends to come from 4 different sources. And they're oddly a mix of elite and ruling class theories about revolutions and rebellions and where they came from. And then at different moments, there's sort of theories from below about how and why bad shit under capitalism is happening. So those 4 parts are basically elite reaction against the French Revolution. Second, from below stuffs, mixed up from below ideas about the rise of industrial capitalism, including anti-Semitism in sort of the latter half of the 1800s, and also at the same time Protestant millenarianism, end days, end of time sort of stuff in the same period. 3, reaction against the Russian Revolution, trying to explain that, as well as sort of the Depression crisis and things like that. And then 4, a whole bunch of sort of new wave conspiracy stuff that arose in the 90s, especially with the rise of like the World Wide Web. It could all be online, and things like that. So I'll go through those really quickly, try not to take too much time with them. The first is sort of the classic, like actual history that gets blown way out of proportion to be what people call the Illuminati. But that's essentially that in the years prior to the French Revolution, all over Europe, there's lots of like little Enlightenment era groups of, craftsmen. The Freemasons are around, and in any given like country or whatnot, there's a lot of little groups that are sort of starting to break out with Enlightenment ideas, and they're maybe against church authority, and for some sort of democratic polity and against the king or something like that. So there was an actual thing called the Order of Illuminists in Bavaria in like the late 1700s or something. It was around for a couple of years, tried to, like many other groups, have that sort of influence, and then was quashed and died out. The thing is, it died out, and then the following year or 2 later, the French Revolution broke out. And so this huge French Revolution occurs. Obviously, like it's just a world historic event in Europe. And then in the years afterward, a series of texts come out that try to explain, like, what the fuck, where did this revolution come from? How is it possible that so many people rose up all at once? Of course, some of the people that are writing it, there's a guy named John Robinson, who's an English intellectual. 1798, he publishes a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies. And in 1803, there's a guy called a Jesuit priest who publishes a similar thing, memoirs illustrating the history of Jacobinism. All of these are pieces that are like, the French Revolution came about. Why? Certainly not because masses of people could make a revolution and run it themselves and rebel. That to them, from their perspective, was like, no, someone had to have engineered this. Right? So from their perspective, they're like, the French Revolution was caused by secret groups, you know, fooling the masses into rebel against the proper order. And a lot of the explanation was it just ended up being this particular group, the Order of Illuminists, sort of tied into those sort of stories. So the Order of Illuminists claim it disappeared, but really they were secretly there within the Jacobins, causing the French Revolution to occur. So pause that. That's an elite theory circulating in the heads of like the European super reactionary elite throughout the 19th century, you know? And put that in a box. Then you have industrial capitalism starts rising. People, you know, the sort of old peasant way of life is being destroyed. A lot of stuff is a lot more horrible, you know, than it was in your parents' generation. And a whole variety of religious and secular ideas develop as to why that's the case. So on the one hand, you have the rise of sort of like a particular a strong historical period of anti-Semitism that it explains a lot of the problems of capitalism as the power of banks and sort of money-lending elite, which they just identify with Jews. Thank you.
You're not supposed to stop. Just keep going.
I got you. This is the same time that like late 1800s. Yeah, I'll grab it if you want. In the late 1800s.
Make fun of you, stupid motherfucker.
Take it.
Yeah, read it.
I'm pulling around the dust in New York.
So around like late 1800s, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is published, which is most likely a piece that's published, like a crazy plagiarized piece published by the Russian secret police. It's crazy anti-Semitic, but frames itself and purports to be like the secret Jewish plan to take over the world. In the same time period, there's a rise of, in the U.S. and parts of Europe, a rise of Protestant millenarianism. So there's a whole bunch of religious debates over like, are the end times coming, and if so, how do we know? And a sort of wing of millenarianism says premillennials believe that like Christ will return prior to the actual end of time, and so you're constantly looking for the signs that Christ's second coming is approaching. You know, some sort of apocalyptic calamity, the rise of the Antichrist, and so forth and so on. So a certain kind of millenarianist thought starts to take shape in that time period, also especially in the U.S., and even deepens after the Russian Revolution. So eventually you'll have people claiming like Mussolini is the Antichrist. The second coming is coming soon. Eventually over time, it keeps shifting. So the computer gets invented, and the computer is the Antichrist. You know, that heralds like the new, or Obama is the Antichrist or whatever. But so that kind of type of thinking emerges. Then I'm trying to move through it quickly. Then after the Russian Revolution, just like after the French Revolution, you have a similar reaction. And it's especially in the 20s and 30s with the rise of fascism. So basically you have a weird sort of, you know how like fascist politics always had that weird occulty kind of edge? Yeah. Like a sort of tied to German romanticism and then back into a weird sort of culty religiosity. Several pieces are published in that time period by a woman named Nesta Webster, who's an English aristocrat, a woman named Edith Starr Miller, who's a she's was an American, daughter of an industrial capitalist that married someone in the English aristocracy. And then also one of the most prominent, this guy Gerald Winrod, who is one of the most prominent U.S. millenarian religious evangelist sort of guys. All three of them publish pieces that are basically like secret societies and subversive movements and the need for fascism. Winrod published Adam Weishaupt, A Human Devil. Adam Weishaupt was the founder of the Historical Order of Illuminists. So there's a whole set of, again, theories that say, why are there, is the working class revolting all over the world? Why is there global depression occurring? Why does there seem to be so much instability? It's certainly not because capitalism creates mass discontent and movements capable of overcoming capitalism. Instead, it's because there's some sort of secret subversive movement out there that's causing all these terrible things to happen. And all the little bits and pieces that have been floating around since that time ideas about the Illuminati since the French Revolution, anti-Semitic ideas about banking conspiracies, millenarian ideas about the end times, all kind of get woven together in these kind of wacky pieces that start to be circulated in Europe and the US in the 1930s. And that's really where you see that core trunk of a Illuminati conspiracy theory narrative come together. Finally, that spreads around the U.S., especially after the 1960s, end of the movements of the 1960s. A lot of the counterculture goes wacky and culty and whatnot. Certainly, there's openings within the black movement for that because you already have strange, like NOI, anti-Semitism, and strange explanations for why white supremacy exists. And with the defeat of the movements, and especially the crushing of the real revolutionary wings, it's like something fills the vacuum, And so those ideas just basically percolate until the 90s. The last thing I have to mention is just basically in the 1990s, you see another wave of new conspiracy theory coming out. Some people call them like super conspiracy theories because they tie together so many different, they tie together UFOs and Area 51 and just any wacky idea that's happened since the 1930s gets woven together. But also starts to be available on the internet and easily published in books and circulated. The most famous is this guy, William Cooper, who wrote a book in 1990 called Behold the Pale Horse. This guy, William Cooper, who wrote Behold the Pale Horse, which if you read through it is just like somewhat unreadable, just like compendium of every conspiracy theory ever all tied together. And Behold the Pale Horse circulates in prison, very widely read. It's on every book table in New York City. And it's a common reference point for Illuminati conspiracy theory of both the sort of black and brown hood version and the kind of white militia millenarianism version, all drawn.
Like question, answer, discussion type of thing. So I think it's important to remember, like, this is great history background, and I think that's perhaps a place to start with people, is to help break that down and help them to understand. But I think also, how do we, that alone, I think is not going to do it. It has to be like, because people want to know, like, why are we living in the conditions we're living in today, And so I think really going back to the materialist analysis rather of that, and like talking about that is perhaps the best way, And one way that I have in the past talked with people about capitalism and, like, for example, like race, like race is huge, and that's what everybody wants to talk about, whether you're talking to black nationalists or whoever, right? Like, this is what I think is the most in-your-face kind of oppression that we see. So what I try to do is connect race back to capitalism. Right? So how do you do that? Well, I take it back to slavery. I think that's like the easiest way to do it, to be honest. So why did slavery, why did we have slavery in this country? What was the purpose of this, right? And a lot of people will tell you, oh, it's racism that existed. It's like they go towards the cultural and the sort of like the ideological, but they miss out on the fact that slavery did what? It allowed for these essentially capitalists, people who own the means of production, to get free labor that allowed them to, build up the capital that was needed to build up this country. So, like, talking about things like that and going to, like, real specific things, right? And so then to make the connection between, why is it that the stereotypes that came about? Why is it these ideas around race came about? Well, because if you're enslaving people for this purpose, to make money, you can't go around saying that, right? Because it's not going to sit well with the conscience of many people. So you have to say what? Well, you have to turn to the cultural stuff. Well, you have to dehumanize. And how do you dehumanize? By making up these stereotypes and making up these false ideas of this entire group of people, right? To be able to say, well, this is why this is justified. This is why slavery is justified. Because look, they're only 2/3 human. They are savages. They need us. We need to bring religion to them. We need to, take these savages and turn them into real people, into Christians. And this is also, that's the basis also for colonization, right? So you can have that conversation in terms of slavery and how race was, this idea of race was exploited during slavery, and actually really, I think that's one of the times, not the only time, but I think one of the times when, like, you know, from where our modern conception of race comes from. But also you can do it in terms of colonization. Why were all these countries colonized around the world? It was not because, I'm sorry, the lie that, you know, we have to go and we have to make these people human is money. You know, people were able to exploit the natural resources. If you own a place, you can just take it. You don't have to give anybody anything. You just take it, and, you know, and then you go and you are able to then produce more and then sell back, and you're making more money. So it's all economics. So really boiling it down to the economics, and then from there explaining the cultural and how the economics then affects and has to shape the cultural in order for it to continue to allow the system to progress and to become what it is. I don't know if this makes sense, but that's one way that I found that's really interesting and helpful to start at with people.
So you're talking about, like, in this case, historical explanation for how the rise of capitalism creates what we now think of as, say, black and white, instead of an explanation that starts from black and white exist, and it's because white people are inherently, they have this essence that history is that they've always been oppressive about. You explain the rise of the people experience.
Explain the economics behind it, I think, is the best way to start. And then that will get to the thing, like the guy that we were talking with who was like, there's just too many rich white people. How do you explain that? Well, this is how we explain it, right? Like, this is one of the ways. Like, let's talk about those things. So I don't know. And it's something, obviously, like, we wrote this and we went through the history a bit. But when it comes to talking with people, we are not experts either. We're also in the process of trying to learn. And I think that's important to understand, you know? Like, we're trying, it doesn't always work. And also, Illuminati folks who believe in Illuminati stuff, have, like, there's real, like, intricate stories and, you know, explanations that they have. So it's hard sometimes to get to the bottom of all those things. But it is, I think you got to remember, it's a process. It's not in one conversation. That's not going to happen, you know? But I think always going back to the economics. And so yourself having a really solid understanding of material explanation of why things exist, why gender differences exist. And that's the other thing too. We meet so many men who are like, oh, you know, the role of men and women, and this is how it's supposed to be, and they somehow, you know, weave that into all of it, the black nationalism, the Illuminati stuff, like all of that. And so really getting behind why gender exists, how was this created, and understanding that you know, it is a creation, and that these roles are not real is something as well to try to work out and to think about. And I haven't done a good job of that, to be honest. I struggle with that. It's very hard to get you know, people who have been so, I mean, we've all been so indoctrinated to believe that gender in particular is like this thing that is real, that, you know, our roles are real. So to try to break with that. And I'm reading more, and for people who are interested in learning more about this, I found that reading some stuff by this woman named Silvia Federici has been very helpful. She's a Italian autonomous Marxist from Italy. She was down with the wages for housework movement. But the way that she just explains things that seemingly are about, like, gender oppression, but really, like, getting beyond that and getting to, like, the economic aspects of it and, like, what is causing this, she does a great job of it. So I've been reading more of that, trying to, like, get my analysis up so that I can have these conversations with people. But I think, like, that's like step one for us, is that on the left we need to also make sure our analysis is on point and we understand fully how capitalism works and how economic exploitation works, and then feeds into the cultural, ideological, racial, gender stuff.
I also think that in many ways conspiracy is connected, you know, it is connected to racism, like you said. But these days, I think it's also connected very much to the Islamophobia.
Yeah.
And I really think that it's an industry.
Yeah.
And, you know, conspiracy plays into fears of people.
Yeah.
And when I was asking before, like, who benefits, and I looked a little bit into that, and, like, Islamophobia is definitely an industry. People are making millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Playing into fears of people, and this is one of the reasons too why I think many big parts of the left are not supporting the Syrian revolution, and they're, like, you know, apologizing for dictators. Like, part of that is Islamophobia, and that goes back to Orientalism, and which is colonialism, a form of colonialism.
And I think even more, like, I think you're right, like, it does go back to that period. But even look now, like, who is benefiting from Islamophobia in terms of industry? It's the arms companies, it's the people that are building the walls, it's the, you know, the weapons manufacturers. They're the ones that are benefiting from this. And so, I just gave myself a splinter. But they're the ones that are benefiting from this. And so, for, you know, when you hear in the media, you know, this fear of Islamophobia, this fear of anything that is Muslim or from the Middle East or whatever, right? It allows, that plays on the ideas people have in their head. And so when we're going to war and saying, you know, we have to protect ourselves from the big bad Muslims, right? People will not question it. Because, sorry, go ahead.
I would also add that it has, when it connects to the conspiracy sort of angle, it shares with any of the classic, like, Illuminati theory stuff, the tendency to take like a broad social system, capitalist system, whatever, and identify that with a literal group of people, basically. Like, that's basically the move of anti-Semitism, right? All of capitalism is bad, banks are somehow important, banks equal Jews, Jews are capital. And there's a whole variety of theories about the anti-Semitism is like the anti-capitalism of the socialism of fools or whatever, because you're attacking a group of people which you somehow metonymically equate with this whole system that you can't really grasp. How do you grasp, like, a system of relations, you know? And so one move, always engaging, you'd have to do some sort of flip where the response would always be like, yes, it's true, there's a powerful group of people at any given moment of time that has a lot more power than other people, but somehow you also have to be able to say those people are generated by a system. You shoot those people, new people will rise up into their place. So it's not like if you just exposed or got rid of the group 20 Skull and Bones members, the system would come crashing down. You need to somehow make the systemic social system primary, and then you can acknowledge particular groups of people in particular times and places. And then it also gives you a way to get around and all the evils of the world are caused by this one particular group. Like, obviously not.
Which I also think, and that's connected to conspiracy, and I think conspiracy is connected very much to fascism, and the new enemy from fascism is now they define the new enemy being actually capitalism and the United States. So, but then, like, I'm saying, well, you know, like, we have to fight more than just capitalism, because that's just one system of oppression, and there's many other system of oppressions. And so I think, like, conspiracy is very much also focusing on just that one enemy and scapegoating. And I think right now the enemy, it seems to be the anti-capitalism, which is very well, you know, that it makes sense, but it's not the only enemy. And the scapegoat right now, instead of, like, anti-Semitism, I think it's Islamophobia. Like, you know, Muslims are now the enemy, because when I look at the fascists in Europe, they're very much friends with Zionists, which is another extreme right-wing movement. So now anti-Semitism is out, you know, like, I see, like, extreme right-wingers, like, opening synagogues and stuff, but then, you know, like, the mayor from my hometown is actually an extreme right wing. It's, like, very scary. So he's opening, like, synagogues, but he's not allowing mosques. You know, so anti-Semitism is out, and, like, Islamophobia is in now.
Well, I think also that's so interesting. You know, I was reading something about in Israel, what's happening, you know, with the people in Gaza being attacked and what's happening there, and Israelis, Zionists, who are using fascist symbols, who are, you know, using fascist slogans, but is in favor of Zionism. And I think that that's a great way also to connect capitalism to these things. Why is it that the fascists and the Zionists are coming together? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about money and power, right? That's what Zionism is. It's not an anti-capitalist thing. And as much as the fascists claim to be anti-capitalist, they're not. They're not.
No, they're not. Of course not. Neither. They just, like, have the anti-capitalist narrative. They use that, but, you know.
Which, of course, is always the most classically dangerous thing of fascist movements, that they maybe think of themselves as even, but lots of other people mistake them for a kind of anti-capitalist movement. And it's also the way that sort of conspiracy theory ties in because it's a sort of mixed up attempt to critique capitalism in many cases, which can easily dovetail with the fascist project. It's like, yeah, we want to kind of critique capitalism in an authoritarian manner, or in a way that benefits a particular wing of maybe petty bourgeoisie or a particular wing of the capitalist class over others, so the hyper-nationalists can gain power, whatever it might be, you know. So it's definitely, I see the resonance, you know, makes total sense.
So what do we do about it? What's the strategy?
Yeah, well, I think honestly, like, first of all, I think particularly in this, well, I would say in New York, what I see of the left is that it's very insular. We need to break out of that. We need to begin engaging with people that are not on the left. You know, we need to, when we live on a block in the hood, we need to be able to, like, build relationships and talk with people, you know? So organizing on that level, I think, is important. I think we need to also, like I said before, brush up on our own shit. Make sure we understand what, you know, make sure we understand the theories that we're going to be hearing, but also make sure that we understand what we believe, too. You know, how capitalism works. Have a good,
so we have better
clear,
and more meaningful explanations to offer people.
Exactly.
And more empowering ones.
Yeah, you know, so we can explain better to people. And I think the other side of it is that write stuff too, you know. I think that's important. Write a little flyer. Talk about, like, hey, and it has to be something that is not academic. We got to break out of that too, you know. Everything cannot be academic. And, you know, there's value to that, but there's also, like, we got to just be able to talk to people. And you know, I think sometimes not everybody reads pamphlets and flyers, but it can also be helpful, you know. And the people that will read it, those are the people that you also want to build with more. So I think, like, perhaps that's a place to start, doing talks like this. And I hope that we can do something like this again here, but, you know, we didn't put as much in, we couldn't put as much time into it as we wanted to, like, prepare. So really, like, not prepare our talk, but prepare, like, to you know, get people to come, basically, to do outreach. So we're hoping to be able to do something else like this where we can engage with other folks, and there will be more people from the neighborhood coming through that we can talk with, and we can say, hey, you know, like, what are some of the things that you've heard? Why do you believe this? And begin to have those conversations. And I think also plugging people into spaces is important, you know, spaces like this, other leftist things, other, you know, because I think for me anyway, the best way for me to break out of that was being able to talk to, have a community of people that I was able to talk about politics with, understand better, you know, getting a better explanation of, like, well, why is this happening, you know. In addition to reading, you know, for me, reading even now, like, I read more now, but it's also hard. Like, I'm not, it's not my go-to thing is, like, to read. I prefer to talk with people. So being open also to, like, alternative forms of learning and understanding and sharing information, you know, everything cannot just be read this book, you know, everyone's not going to do that. So how can we talk with people and help people to understand?
Oh, why do you think it's important to fight conspiracy theory?
Oh, because it goes back to the Ferguson example.
Yeah.
The most important rebellion against the white supremacist capitalism in the last 20 years has occurred in the United States in the last 2 weeks, and conspiracy theory's answer to it is everyone there is a dupe. They couldn't possibly have risen up on their own. It must be some really powerful person running everything, pulling the strings. We should just stay as far away from it as we can. The essence of these conspiracy theories, whether they're elites trying to explain why rebellions happen and, oh, it's because the really smart person is pulling the strings, or it's oppressed people trying to explain it's because some really smart people are pulling the strings. Either way, they share the same fundamental features, which are you can only think of history moving through a small group of all-powerful elite actors, and masses of people can't do shit on their own. You know, that's just a fundamentally disempowering worldview, which means you're either gonna, like, stay hunkered down waiting for the Antichrist to come, or you're gonna hear that from someone who claims to be a really powerful Hitler figure who can solve the problem, and you'll get behind them. You know, so ultimately you have to defeat that. And the good thing is, what's on our side is people's desire to be free. Like, people really do want shit to change, you know?
I'm gonna write about that perfect.
I'm saying, it's like, people do want things to change, and ultimately it's like, do you want a theory that tells you you can't? Or I'm offering you some other ideas about here's how you can. You know?
Right, so you're saying it's counterproductive to activism.
Certainly.
Yes.
No, yeah, absolutely. Because, like, remember, it prevents people from actually seeing what's just blatantly obvious. and like it's this disempowering force that further alienates you from like understanding what is actually happening, and then prevents you from actually acting on that. And so when combating these theories, you absolutely have to like know the facts, but you have to also come where people are personally and mentally, and just, you know, have a dialogue with them and explain like, you can do something about this. There is a larger reason for this, but it's not, you know, some crazy conspiracy thing where people, you know, the Antichrist or anything like that. So like, always have that alternative explanation for whatever they thought, and then, you know, nurture that explanation through, you know, personal relationships, and just, you know, taking them to spaces, taking them to activist events, taking them wherever they see that people are doing something meaningful to challenge the system and make a change for their, you know, liberation, for their freedom. Definitely.
You guys still want to say?
No, I just want to say I hope we can do this again and have a bigger crowd, and I hope you will come back when that happens, so maybe we can exchange contact info and I'll let you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.